Okay, good evening, everyone. It's great to see a full room despite the winter weather we're probably going to get in the next few hours. So, as stated earlier, we are going to curb some of our opening remarks a tad to make sure that we can get our in-person people on the road between 8:30 and 8:45. As of our reliable WTOP weatherman 10 minutes ago, looks like the precipitation chance is during 9 o'clock less than 50%, but 10 o'clock it goes up to 80%. So if we thought the winter weather was behind us, looks like the groundhog and Puxatony Phil is right, and we have a few more weeks. So let me make sure we have good comms with our Zoomers. Okay. So you're not supposed to say Happy New Year after January 17th, so we won't say that, but it's great to start our 2025 program here. Our normal opening remarks were bundled with we understand in the county with the Marriott reduction in force and what's going on with the federal government right now. A lot of you are either looking for jobs, or if you have jobs, you're fearful that the collective we may not have those jobs months from now. We hear you. We will be prioritizing partnering with some of the attempt to hire firms, Apex Solutions, a few others in the coming weeks. So this is a priority for us. You'll also be seeing Black History Month spotlights and a lot of industry events coming up, and we'll try to keep our promise to have virtual lunch and learns or something virtual per month in addition to being down here in the room. Round of applause for wait staff for the in-person. Okay, we'll also keep our signed book promise for our in-person attendees. This month's book is Defy by Dr. Sunita Shah, The Power of No in a World That Demands Yes. This is an apolitical book, even though it was released in January after an election year. But if you look at it more towards you do a good job with a project, so they give you 3 more, and you're like, hey, I can't really do this. But if you stick up for yourself, do you lose your job? Do you lose your standing? Do you lose those opportunities? So this has some good guides. I think it's already on the way to being one of the top thought leadership books of 2025, even though we're only a month in. So well, if you put your raffle ticket in your name tag, if you want to flip that around, last 4, 7290. Anybody? 7290? Nope. Okay. We'll come back to that one. 7273. 7290. Yeah. Yep. 7273. Ms. Norfolk.
Yes, ma'am.
And our last winner, virtual drum roll, 7315. Okay, we'll have a 10-second pause before we go to the 4th number. 7315. Nobody's in the restroom. Okay. Okay, 7304. Hey, great. I trust you. If you can't trust the project manager, who can we trust? So It's an honor and a privilege to have Mr. Don Hoffman here with us this evening. Double N and a few of the marketing. We had only the one N, so our apologies. Right now, he's serving as a supplier program manager at the Sierra Nevada Corporation, which is doing great things with contracts all across the country and the world. He's had multiple director operations roles in his career, Lean Six Sigma black belt, and a practitioner of that. He just doesn't hold up the black belt when it's convenient. He's actually applies it. A 30-year career at Lockheed Martin, which we'll hear about today. And most importantly, he's a world-renowned rock and jazz keyboardist. So, for the sake of time, we welcome Mr. Hoffman here. Thanks to our great programs team for getting him. And
thank you, Matt. That I don't know about that last bullet there. You took some liberties, I think. Hey, it's great to be back at a live PMI meeting. Let's have a round of applause here. Yeah, I was normally at the Frederick site, and we haven't been having meetings lately. So it's great to know where to come. I live up in Newmarket, so it's not too far away. So thank you very much for having me. Appreciate the invitation. When I was driving down 70 from Hagerstown, my wife called me. She said, "You know, there's an ice storm coming. You better not talk too long." I know how you can be. So I'm going to do my best. I mean, this trip down memory lane is a little bit of a self-indulgence, I have to say. I did try to glean some nuggets of truth through my career here in different roles that I've had and apply them to learnings that a project manager should keep in mind in any new project. I hope you feel that when you leave here, you got reminded of a few things maybe that you knew already, but a reminder is good. So the first, oh, that's the pointer, okay. There we go. Yeah, so this first slide, I just threw some random photos up there. Thought I'd explain what's going on. Can you guys see okay? Should I move the select term? Okay. And I graduated from Lafayette College with a BSME in 1983. Wasn't the best year for getting hired as a mechanical engineer. I sent about 30 resumes out to California. Being a surfer as well as a musician, I kind of wanted to live by the beach, so I was all in on Southern California and had about 30 bullets hanging on my fraternity door. Was not the best result. I did get an offer to go work for Douglas Aircraft, and that was super exciting. But while I was still at school, right before spring break, they sent me a note and said, the contract we thought you were going to be on was canceled, so the deal's off. And so I had to rally, had to figure out what to do. So I went down to Florida during spring break and tried to get a job with Harris Corporation down in Melbourne. I'd been down at Florida Institute of Technology as a junior in high school. It's a great surf spot down there. It's Vashon Inlet. And it seemed like an exciting thing to do. So I did force my way into an interview there. But that didn't pan out. So came back to Philadelphia, where I grew up around Bucks County, Pennsylvania. And my uncle told me about Operation Native Talent, which was a job fair in Philadelphia. He wanted my cousin to go, so he thought if he could get me to go, my cousin would go. So I went and ended up getting an interview with RCA, Camden, New Jersey. And I got a job from that. I worked on a mini Baja project and my senior project as a mechanical engineer. Got to take it to Fort Belvoir and race it against some other teams, and that was interesting. And that was kind of what interested them and me. And you'll see some pictures of why that came to be. But so when I started out, I was in this complex. If you ever gone over the Ben Franklin Bridge in Philadelphia, you probably see this tower. It's condos now. But there used to be a machine shop, finishing shop on the 6th floor of that building. I sat in the building next door to that when I started, and it was the same floor that they built these wooden TV cabinets in days gone by. So in the 70s, well, probably starting in the 50s, 60s, they started to convert that facility to more defense work away from commercial. And so that was the start of my career as a mechanical engineer working for RCA. Now, when I got there at RCA, I found out that probably the reason that they didn't want to hire me at Melbourne is that they competed for this ground-based SATCOM radar or SATCOM communications job. That contract went back and forth between RCA and Harris Corporation in Melbourne. So that was kind of poetic in a way to find out that that was the case. Didn't help me get to Florida, didn't help me get to California, but that'll come later. So this first program that I was on, SATCOM ground terminals, ANTSC 100A, 94A. It was a portable SATCOM ground terminal that was for the Air Force. And my job as a mechanical engineer was to sit on the manufacturing floor and write change notices. As we found design problems, I'd write a change notice, get with supply chain because we already had material on order, get production stopped on certain things, tell them we're going to be sending them changes and try to minimize the cost impact of those changes. Well, over a 3-year period, I wrote about 1,000 of those ECNs. So I learned a lot fixing other people's mistakes. It was a kind of situation where we won the contract, hired a lot of guys from Westinghouse that I guess were laid off and, you know, threw them at this design job. We're, you know, working quickly under schedule to meet priorities, to get certain drawing counts released when the schedule would say, so we get a milestone payment. And, you know, I would understand that a little more as time went on and could understand what kind of pressures there were. But one of the main things that I learned through this process was my first taste of dealing with subcontractors. Because on this job, which you'll see in the next slide, we outsourced the design of a power pallet that powered this system. It held 2 30 kW generators and had to go through all the Aberdeen Proving Ground tests, rail hump tests, Munson Road tests, all those tests. And so you'll see that in the next slide. One of the things that goes along with that is on this program, there was GFE, government furnished equipment. Anybody have to deal with GFE at all? So, you know, other companies are making GFE under contract. Sometimes it meets the interface specs, sometimes it doesn't. And, you know, one of the key takeaways that I learned here was the sooner you can learn whether or not that GFE is good or not, the better off you are. And so as that young engineer, I found that the set of mobilizers that they had sent us, and this is a look-alike picture. These, all my photos on here are scraped from the web. They're public photos. So, but this is similar to what we were doing at the time. And the distance between these two holes in those mobilizers was off. And so they had me contact TACCOM, the government, the part of the Army that was responsible for the manufacturing and the subcontracting of those mobilizers. And we found out, you know, when he came out and said, "You're right, these holes are off, something happened." Well, yeah, when the manufacturer welded, the uprights moved in. They weren't fixtured properly, so they had to all get fixed. So that was an early learning for me, just to make sure. And we have this situation at Sierra Nevada right now. We're on the Hades program. We have a lot of GFE that comes to us, and a lot of it needs to be upgraded. And so it's best to start working on that as soon as you receive it, as opposed to waiting until you think you need it. So another one of my redesign projects was this is a KG-81. It's kind of surprised to see pictures of this on the web, but you know, it's pretty old. I guess it's an old design. Piece of crypto gear. Well, our mechanical designers on this program wanted to fit 6 of them in this amount of space here, very tight. And it took me 2 tries to redesign the box to hold this, which each one of these things is probably 40 pounds. And this is rather heavy. You could never move that box with all of them in there. That got installed in the shelter. That would go in one of these locations, and then those KGs would go in individually. But it took a couple tries to redesign that. But that was another case where the GFE was not always exactly what we had hoped it would be. So early on, as a design support, manufacturing support engineer, that was one of the key things that I learned about GFE. Now, the other thing that happened here was we outsourced the design of this power pallet. Our engineering team was so focused on the inside of the communication shelter, because back then there was not a lot of cots, right? So we designed everything ourselves. All those boxes in there were designed in-house, essentially. And so we outsourced the design of this power pallet. And so it's kind of a situation where we set the subcontract, send it down there. It's kind of like set it and forget it, right? And all of a sudden, you know, we're ready for them to ship. And, you know, they shipped their first iteration of this design up to us. We put the generators on, take it to Aberdeen Proving Grounds, and it fails. Well, that wasn't very good. So what we found out was they put the B team on this design work. We didn't have anybody monitoring it in process, definitely not engineers. You know, there were no trips down there that I knew of where, you know, we were really getting a sense. And this was, that was done by a company, I don't think they're in business anymore, Metric Systems, down in Fort Walton Beach, Florida. And so I got to go down there for a month while the A team redesigned it. And so that was my first experience of, you know, a deep dive subcontract fix job. And kind of taught me a lot of lessons for what I do now in dealing with our group of subcontracts folks that let large subcontracts for SNC to companies like Bombardier, Leonardo, L3, Leidos, and you know, we're high contact. So, you know, once that SOW goes out, things come back, we're under contract. You know, we're pulsing them every week or every 2 weeks, and it's high contact. So there's no set it and forget it. on that. After 3 years of the factory floor, I was ready for something different. As much fun as that was. And it was interesting because at RCA, we also did space work. We did the EVA backpack radio on the first spacesuit. We did the EVA or the space shuttle camera. So we leveraged that to help us win work package 2, the communications and tracking system on the space station. So I spent 6 years on the space station program. The first couple were really trying to win the job, which was very interesting. I have this little thing up here, Technoglam. What new technology was going on at the time? Well, I got to go out to McDonnell Douglas. They were one of the work package prime contractors, and we were on their team against Boeing for work package 2. It was a manned portion of the space station, and personal computers were just coming out about that time, which many of us in this room probably remember, right? There was that dream that someday everyone would have a computer on their desk. And look where we are now, right? And so being that we had to go out to California and have our proposal write-up reviewed by the book bosses at McDonnell Douglas, we were set in a room with all these Macintosh computers in a row that were tied to a laser printer. And that was one of the first laser printers that Apple gave anybody. And to see the quality that came off of that laser printer compared to dot matrix printers that we all had back at the ranch was kind of memorable. But that was a neat part of it. But when I think back at that experience, and anybody that works proposals knows how important a daily stand-up meeting is for proposals to keep everybody coordinated. And even now in Sierra Nevada, we get people in the same room. As good as we are with Teams and as good as we are, doing things virtually these days, it still takes that contact and the proximity to help us, get to where we need to be to tell the story. And one of the things that helped us win, I think, and this was relayed back to us from the folks at Johnson Space Center, we made a mock-up of what the new spacesuit radio would be. At one time, as part of the space station program, that's called the dual keel design. That all got designed out by Congress. Every year, we lost more and more money on the program as things got designed out. But along with this approach, we were supposed to have a whole new aluminum spacesuit. And this new radio was going to go along with that. But we built a mock-up of that radio and sent it down to Johnson, and it made the rounds down at Johnson. And word was that that really helped us because we showed that we could get the performance, even though it was a mock-up, there was a way they could visualize the how we could get to a unit the size and weight and performance they were looking to get. So mock-ups are powerful. These days with everything being, digital design, with solid modeling, and we're trying to build an aircraft for the first time with no prototype. Everything's modeled, and it's hard, without the physical it's hard to make that work all the time, as good as our tools are these days.
One question.
Yes.
Can't take away that stand-up meetings are essential daily. I think we're now in a time where it's like, let's not just have meetings for the sake of having meetings, talking every day, it's redundant. I guess what's your counterattack to the,
Well, I think yeah. Well, they got to be for the right reason, right? So that was kind of relating to the proposal situation. So, early in the proposal, you might be able to get by without it, but when it gets to be crunch time, everybody's got to come together. I think a little later on, I kind of get into this. There was a time we were sitting in meetings and worried about people on their phones. Now you come to a meeting, everybody just brings their laptop, they're multitasking. And, if you have a live meeting, I mean, they'll bubble up when something interests them, but, everybody's multitasking all the time. And so I think, the pandemic kind of taught us that we got to, for health reasons, there's good reasons not to have a lot of face-to-face meetings. So that has to be taken into consideration. I'd rather sit in my office, and Teams into a meeting, and if it's not a time when I need to contribute, be working on something else, and that can make sense. But there are certain folks want to see everybody in the room, and there are times when that's necessary for sure. So, yep, you want to use them when you need them. So, one of the things that resonated with me around that time period, somehow somebody gave me that 1 Minute Manager book. Does anybody remember that 1 Minute Manager? It was a short one, kind of like Who Moved My Cheese, or one of those. And they're great. They got some nice wisdom in a small package. And for me, just as an individual contributor or somebody that wanted to be a leader someday, understanding those concepts and how to make the right contact with people, how to build a rapport, how to ask the right questions, how not to make them feel like you're just statusing them all the time, how to make it, make them feel like you can help them get their job done, which, even as a manager and a leader, a lot of times that's what your job is, to eliminate roadblocks and create the right kind of environment. But for me, that book helped a lot when I was, just coming up as an individual contributor and a new leader. We talk about meetings, and this is right where I mentioned kind of work ethic and what are we doing in meetings? Can we keep people engaged? I think that engagement part it's tough to lead a meeting and keep everyone engaged these days. But I lead a lot of Teams meetings with folks from other companies, and we keep them short and to the point, and that seems to work out well. So one of my first leadership positions as a lead engineer, I got a chance to lead a design team after my 6 years on space station, where I have to say, I once we won space station, I became a systems engineer, and ended up writing system specs, mechanical parts of the system specs for the TDRS antenna and the communication system. So I got a chance to learn systems engineering, and then moved into my first leadership job, and that's on a new design. It was a program called Pygmalion, And the idea of Pygmalion was to come up with the next generation KY68, which was a field phone, and have a smart handset. It was going to be one of the first smart handsets. Now that job ended up getting canceled because they decided to just use ST phones in the field. We'll just make a lot of ST phones, and if they fail, we'll just replace them. So that was, around the time in the 90s when, the Perry Initiative and the drive for COTS and outsourcing and trying to move away from customization. So unfortunately that happened, but it didn't happen, happen late enough that we did get to do some proof of concept and build some initial units. And that was my first taste really of EVM, earned value management. And we sat down weekly there with the program manager to do EVM. And, that's where, I first saw this propensity, especially as somebody leading electrical engineers and mechanical engineers, where you want to be able to take credit for things, right? And so quickly, the first couple months, you got 50% done, 60%, 70%, then 90%, 91%, 92%, 93%. So, you got to be careful about how you're taking earnings and earned value. And I, going back and forth with the program manager, telling them why, certain things weren't complete or as far along as we thought, just rammed home to me that you need to be a little conservative in the front end and don't be, overly optimistic. And if there's things that are starting not to go well, report it as soon as you can. And maybe you'll get some help. And maybe that'll help things go quicker. So, everybody likes to say bad news doesn't age well, and that's true for sure. One of the things I learned there too, in terms of motivating a team, is to have some strong artifacts. If you can show on a single piece of paper, in a sense, what your goal is and how each week, at the end of the week, you can see where you are on that goal, against that goal, that's a really useful thing. And these are some examples of programs I've been involved with. CES2, that was a commercial entry system. Later on, you'll see when I talk about digital signal, that was a 3D facial recognition system, first generation. And that was a chart on the development progress there. Programs on a page are very useful. I mean, of course, with MS Project, schedules go on forever. And, usually a program, a customer's gonna want to see this one, shot of the main milestones on one sheet, which is a great reference for the whole team to have, right? So, a lot of times the program manager will have it, the scheduler will have it, certain people will have it, but it's great when the people on the floor can see this, and in the engineering cubes. This was a metrics board that we put together up in Syracuse. So I'll go into that a little bit more. But one of the things that we showed on here that allowed anyone to tour the floor and basically have an explanation of what the product flow was and see what the key metrics were for that particular work cell. So for the people in the work cell, this was their place to see their progress. So up there, we had lockers next to this and a place for them to put their drinks down. It's like a mini break station where they didn't have to go all the way to the break room to take a break. They could just stand up from their workstation and take a drink and also, be looking at the metrics board. And so this thing was updated weekly. These are no good if you don't update them. And that's the thing, a lot of times companies will, jump into something like this, get something up, and then it doesn't get maintained. A lot of these days, you'll see monitors, television monitors with rolling graphics, and that's nice. But, sometimes if you want to zoom in on something and take some time, you're standing there waiting for it to come up again. But I think that's one of the things that I continue to work on is in any new challenge, if I can try to get to a visual that the people that are working on that project can relate to, and that becomes the tool for us to see our progress. And it's tricky. It doesn't always jump out at you. It might be adding some color to an Excel, a particular Excel with a lot of data on it. But the other part of it is, like in this case, we use this when we needed to, drive build rates to meet new goals, which I'll get into in a minute. It was important to get the team to commit to say, yeah, we think we can make it, and everyone wants to see how close they are. Then if you need a little overtime, there it is. Why do you need overtime? Well, we had this unexpected thing happen. If we do, put 3 people on this for 2 more hours, we can get back up to the line. It's not an abstract. So something to consider. So about 12 years in, I had to make a tough decision. Stay in engineering or go over to operations. And, if I stayed in engineering, I could have maybe gone into program management and, gone up that way. On a program that's not on here, Split RCU, it was basically a red program. We were behind schedule. We had quality problems. We had a asynchronous data situation. We were getting dropout. All those units were airborne. They had to go through temperature and humidity testing. And so we had some technical problems to fix, but then we weren't getting good flow out on the production line. So one of the guys that I worked with early on in the first 3 years, a quality guy, Tom, said, hey, we need to use C-flow, continuous flow, and redesign this line out on the floor. So here I was an engineer, he's a quality guy, and we're going to go tell the ops people how to set their line up. Well, we did. The program manager said, we need to do something. You need to go tell these guys how to set this line up. And so we knew the operators because we'd worked with them before, and they had ideas, but people weren't listening to their ideas. And there were some flex cables involved and some routing issues. And so we worked with them and we figured out a way to relay the line out. And we took hours out of each unit. And so the director of operations saw us do that. And it didn't really make him look good. It's like, well, why can't my guys do that? So he came to me and gave me an offer I couldn't refuse, I guess. And so I decided to go over to operations. And that one decision led me to being here, essentially. Otherwise, I'd be back in Camden working for L3 Harris. Poetry again. So one of the things I got to do was lay out a production line. When I went over to operations, since I was an engineer, they put me in charge of manufacturing engineers and test engineers. And meanwhile, this was the part of the show where I was going to talk about mergers and acquisitions. All the dates are in the notes below the charts. But so what's going on behind here, behind the scenes? Well, like I said, I started with RCA. Well, during this time period, GE Aerospace bought RCA. And for a while, Jack Welch was part of the aerospace and defense industry. Well, he didn't really like it when he had to go to Congress, and he decided he didn't want to do it. So he sold that to Martin Marietta. So Martin Marietta, during around that time, bought a company called Perry Systems, which I'll get into a little later. But back at GE, the reason I wanted to bring up GE Aerospace is GE set up centers of excellence. Any of your companies have centers of excellence? Yeah, so what they did was whatever site made printed wiring boards, they had to give all their equipment up, and it got sent to one of two centers of excellence. One was in Bridgeport, New Jersey. One was in Conklin, New York. And they were going to use non-union. RCA was a union shop. Morristown associated with that builds the Aegis system. I was a union engineer and union floor people, IUE. So we did that. GE did that. It was back when it was fashionable to have self-directed workforces. Anybody hear of a self-directed workforce? Okay, so it was an experiment. We never knew what the rates were going to be. They had stand-up meetings every morning, except they were sitting on couches back then. They had sit-down meetings and got their strategy together. I had to go down there from time to time because our work in Camden was coming up from there. Well, when GE sold to Martin Marietta, all that got changed, and the equipment went back to where it came from, plus some new equipment. And so in Camden, I got the chance to lay out the new shop floor. And that's what this is. And some of this equipment, really in the prototyping part, came back from one of those rec centers, and other things we bought new. This was a TP-18. It was a Swedish pick and place machine, very flexible. And that was one of the first ones in the country. So I got a chance to go to capital equipment suppliers, pick out our wave solder machine, our cleaning, semi-aqueous cleaner. And it was a big learning experience for me dealing with capital equipment. And one of the things that was going on at the same time was our program managers negotiating and trying to win this STI phone contract. Anybody ever use a STI phone here? Made in a couple places in the United States. And so we made a lot of them in Camden. But that program manager said, we will never make STI phones in Camden. It'll be too expensive. And this was back in the 90s when everything was outsourced. And so we went through a make-buy process. And of course, how healthy your factory is has to do with your overhead rates for the whole facility, at least for operations, but for the whole facility. And one of the things that it was very heated, let me just say, between the operations team and the program management team, because they made certain promises to the customer or made statements that maybe they shouldn't have. And that was, my takeaway here. When it comes to interacting with operations and other functions, you really need to understand what's going on in the business. How healthy is the business? Where should work be placed? Has anybody had to make-buy decisions here? No? Okay. Well, normally it's a situation where you get quotes from the outside, and even if you're like 40% more to do it inside, it's going to be a make decision because it's going to help your overhead rates. So when you're a project leader, you can't do it in a vacuum. You gotta think about the whole business. That's the point there. So from Camden, I got sent to Syracuse. What they told me was this program was in trouble right here. This was a towed array program. These towed arrays, anybody watch Hunt for Red October? Okay, so Jonesy has the headphones on. The hydrophones are in that towed array. It's a long hose that gets paid out the back of a submarine or a surface ship. So we were way overspent on this for a couple reasons, but they sent me up there, as kind of a fixer to what I ended up doing was putting an earned value system in for the floor. How do we know where we are? There was really no way to collect any good labor numbers. And we saw all the rework stacking up, the hours of rework. Well, why were we doing rework? And why did we have to unhose? Well, we go to test and we find bad hydrophones. Well, why are the hydrophones bad? Who's talking to the vendor? And, they were really not being forceful with the vendor, and that ended up being the solution. But every time you had a bad hydrophone, you had to take a mile-long array of hydrophones out of this hose. And so that was another case ramming home the, necessity to manage your suppliers well. But some of the things I learned up in Syracuse, this is where I got my black belt. We had a GE manager, a GE VP come in, and he wanted at least 5 black belts on the team. So we actually were some of the first black belts in Lockheed, all because of GE. And we got our training down at Control Systems in Binghamton and got a chance to apply it to some different product lines. But one of the things that I wanted to lead into here, and this kind of gets back to make-buy in a sense, is what was going on at Syracuse at this time was the site needed to be saved. The overhead rate was 300%. They had lost a lot of contracts. The only way Syracuse was to survive was to shut down Lockheed Martin in Utica and move the E2C Hawkeye work to Syracuse. Take this Gould work that was Glen Burnie work that was done down here in Maryland and move that to Syracuse. And so, and I was from Camden and RCA, and they threw me in the mix. And so here you had 3 parties of people that were upset. The Syracuse people were upset because they thought that more Utica people should be laid off so that more Syracuse people could have been saved. And meanwhile, the Utica people couldn't sell their houses because the market was down. They had to commute across the thruway to Syracuse. And meanwhile, the Glen Burnie people, they're from Maryland. They don't want to move to Syracuse. I think maybe 3 people moved out, after they wined and dined the team at the Carrier Dome and they got to watch a Syracuse game and all that. They can only get 3 people to move. But what I had to do was, I had a team called the productivity team. We had about 2,000 processes that needed to be combined. Each one of these groups had their own standard processes for doing operations in manufacturing. And so somehow we had to get morale back up, with this group. And, there's folks going through similar situations these days. And, how do you do that? And I think, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I think if you're in this situation, there's a book on it, on corporate mojo and how to maintain the mojo. I think it's useful. The Marshall Goldsmith who wrote the book identified these 4 factors, and I tried to relate that to how to function as an individual in that situation, how to function as a project team, and then as a corporation. One of the things we did with that team, we eventually won America's 10 Best Plants Award from Business Week, and so that was a neat achievement. I mean, eventually the team all came together. We got more work. We got the overhead rate down to 150%. And that was a situation where there was an engineering rate and an ops rate. And that's like a 3-beer discussion. How can you build things in the lab so you don't have to pay the operations rate? But anyway, I think, some key points here would be, having the right kind of portfolio, which the business was trying to key in on, and keeping the customer satisfied. One of the nice things about Lockheed Martin and a lot of companies these days have leadership development programs where you bring people in from right out of school, put them in a 2-year rotation program. They go from in the case of operations in Lockheed, it was 6-month rotations. You do a year at one site, a year at another site. And so you get this cross-pollination of best practices. They'll go from one site to another, take best practices with them, or the flow will be vice versa. And they all talk to each other, and it's a great situation. And that really helped to build the morale there too, eventually. So from Syracuse, after 7 years in Syracuse, maybe that's a book, 7 years in Syracuse. Anybody have to go to Syracuse for anything? Not too many people. There's the dinosaur barbecue's fun up there. I got an opportunity to lay out a new factory in Florida. So finally I got to Florida, finally. And so that's like my 20th year of work, let's say. I got to Florida. So what they needed, this shot right here is the high bay that's right on the Intercoastal Waterway. If you're familiar with Palm Beach, if you've ever gone over to Blue Heron Bridge from Palm Beach to Singer Island, off to the right, down the coast a little bit is this building. Inside this building is kind of like a final integration test area for underwater vehicles. These doors open up and there's a gantry that goes out over the water and you can lower the vehicles into the water. Now, on the other side of, well, almost to 95, we rented an old furniture we rented what was a furniture warehouse in a pretty new business center. And what they wanted was to set up a factory to build these remote mine hunting systems. So I got a chance to do that and build the second EDM, lead the team that built the second engineering development model. What became a capital unit because the program was having problems. Lockheed was kind of forced to buy one themselves for 10 million bucks. So we did that and we made that one. And then we did the first LRIP. I was there for the first low rate initial production unit. So I got a chance to put the air conditioning in, figure out how all the workstations are going to be set up, where the drops are going to be. And meanwhile, the design work's going on and there's a lot of design changes. Now, you know, I'm coming off of Syracuse where I was a black belt, Lean Six Sigma. I wanted to shadow box everything. And that's what we did to a degree. And meanwhile, we spent all this time on presenting kits the right way. Then the designs would change. And then, you know, we're kind of amplifying the impact of those design changes because, you know, we were trying to get to the end game in production before the design was done. And so that was a little lesson that I learned there. I mean, my boss at the time, even though I was an engineer, didn't really want me to get into the engineering swim lane. And I had plenty to do just trying to lead the operation part of it. But unfortunately, because of reliability issues, this program ended up getting canceled after about 10 of these systems. It went on for another 10 years. And went to OpEval, went through all kinds of testing, and it wasn't just the part we built, but also the Raytheon sonar and, you know, other parts of this. But, you know, what this is a 350 horsepower Cummins diesel engine that's breathing through this mast here, and it pays out this sonar, and you know, it's there to sense where mines are. So out in front of Palm Beach, right out from Mar-a-Lago, is a fake minefield where we would run patterns and look for things, and we'd find some drug planes here and there as well. But you know, my key takeaway here was don't overestimate design stability when investing in process and tooling. I did get the chance to go on the F-35 flight line early on when the first set of tooling that they did there, and one of my former bosses was down there helping to run manufacturing, and he told me the staggering number of millions of dollars they spent on that tooling. Then I went down again and they said, yeah, we're doing it a different way now. You know, we just spent $100 million on tooling. Now we've ripped all that out and we're doing it a different way. And, you know, you learn along the way and you do what you have to do. But
one question.
yes.
At what point on your journey did you get your BME, and was it of value to you, or did you?
Sure. Yep. So I will get to that after the next slide, I think. So I did this chart, you know, it talks about product development, and that's what that underwater vehicle, the RMV, RMS program, or RMMV was called. You know, there's when you're doing new product design, and this is kind of Alan Cohen's book here on 7 deadly sins or 11 deadly sins of product development. Was kind of more commercially driven, but I thought there were some good points in here. So I wanted to kind of relate this to my situation, and it relates to that RMV, but it also relates to biometrics, facial recognition that I'll get into in a minute. But I've seen these things happen, where in a new product design, and we'll talk about risk burn down in a minute. But putting off serious testing until the end of the development is something that can burn you, and you want to try to avoid as much as possible. Of course, PMP is all about having a good project plan, IPTs, having cross-functional teams, very important. So some good ideas there. After Florida, this is what got me to this area here in Rockville. So across the street here used to be Lockheed Martin. Anybody remember Lockheed Martin buildings over there? So I sat over there 5 years, used to come over here for dinner when I had to work late, avoid the traffic driving up 270 to Newmarket. But across the street there, we did the ERAM program. There's a little bit of discussion in the news these days about air traffic management. And so what we did, the team that I had there, we were responsible for upgrading the air traffic management terminals at the 22 ARTCs. They're the regional air traffic management centers around the country. So we'd have to plan that all out, get things installed third shift. And in this situation, I was at director level with senior managers reporting to me and subcontract managers, so it was kind of part of supply chain, but it didn't include procurement. And so that was a key challenge for me because we had some pretty big contracts, like $500 million for IBM computers that had redundant power supplies that didn't always work. And so we had to have them all round robin and repaired. We had to prove to them first that they had a problem, which we proved in our lab, and then we had to get them to replace it. And so that was not the most pleasurable thing. Then another part of this, which is kind of a key learning, and I haven't really said much about stakeholders, but in developing this ERAM software, for some reason, the FAA didn't want the air traffic controllers involved in the design. So when they got a chance to see it finally, they said, you got 130 problems here. We can't field this thing until you guys get this fixed. So I came back to Lockheed. Lockheed said, okay, well, we'll work overtime to do it. We'll pay our 800 software engineers overtime to do this work on the ADA. That's ADA code. Trying to find ADA programmers these days is a little tough, but anyway, so a couple takeaways here. Get your stakeholders involved early, and try to know who your end user is. We've all heard that before, but try to make it work. I mean, we lost a year probably in fielding ERAM because of that. And I had the illustrious job of adding up all the overtime numbers so we could prove to the customer that we were really doing the overtime. And we also did over there some international air traffic management. We did the centers in Kazakhstan with a system, and it's in some other locations also. So, when it comes to working with subcontracts, I like to think about it in terms of a trust model. And, when I tried to chart that, I think in my head, well, in my dealings with this subcontractor, is my trust level a 1 or a 5? And I tried to think of the reasons why it would be one of those numbers. And, there are times when you'll get lied to. I mean, you just know you're getting lied to. And of course, that would be like a 0 or a 1. We talked about how often to have meetings and how often to monitor. I mean, if you've got a supplier that is just always disappointing you, that's the time when you're camping out there and you got somebody there full time. And so you're monitoring daily. And, if their head's in the right place, but there's an occasional miss and maybe they have some systemic problems that you just don't know about yet. I mean, you want to have your people go in and do an audit, but, keep the monitoring to like weekly. And sometimes, you need that because they need things from you. And so you want to be available to them when they need you. So it's a two-way street. Having open communication lines, and that's, kind of the way I operate now, is to try to make sure, we have frequent communication. So even if they're 10 minutes long, the opportunity is there to exchange information as a group, not just sending emails around. So, I think about it that way. And then, when you do get into regression analysis and doing other things, you start thinking about how do you build a model, and technology forecasting, which is another whole presentation I'd like to do at some point, but you can get into building your own models to be able to project technology growth areas. But when I thought about this, I thought, okay, what kind of credibility do they have? The good things you put on the top of the equation, the bad things you put on the bottom. So if you were to, kind of score them in these areas, you could create a quantitative measure that way if you were trying to rate a number of vendors. So one of the things that as a director is hard, you become more insulated from what's really going on in the lab, out on the production floor. And so how do you penetrate that? Well, you got the good metrics, KPIs, the right kind of metrics. And, one of the points here, a lot of times these evolve over time, but they don't really become real to me until it's reflected in your cost estimating tools. Okay, you could say, hey, we think we're getting better in this, we think we're getting better in that. What's our ECN count or change traffic or our first pass yield? Well, if you're saying your first pass yield keeps getting better and better, then it ought to be reflected in your cost numbers at some point in time. So, when you're managing a large portfolio, these were all different programs on the top here, and these are all different functions in my group, and they didn't all work on every program. Some of the functions worked on, some programs and not others. It decided. It depended, and every month we would go through this, and the thing that I would like to see and made sure we had was the history, so we know how we're trending. And so that's a tough thing. So the last experience I'll talk about, and this is where I got into PMP. When I got laid off from Lockheed after 29 years, because I didn't want to move again, my boss had already moved to Colorado, and he said, if you don't get out of here, you're going to go probably, and that 2 years later, that's what happened. But then Leidos was born. So I view myself as human sacrifice for Leidos. A couple of years before the formation of Leidos, that building was cleared out of certain levels of management and people to get the books to look good. And then Leidos was formed with, and there was reasons why that had to happen at that time, back at that metrics chart. How I assigned people could affect their benefits. We had historic, the people that worked on ERAM were IBM heritage people that had great benefits. The other more IT related programs that we had going on, like programs with the FBI, fingerprinting, biometrics. We had acquired some other companies and we had different benefits. And there was a lot of competition out in the marketplace for IT programs from smaller companies. And so that couldn't go on the way it was. It just couldn't. And I really didn't want to be in that position to make those kind of decisions necessarily. So it was just a bad situation. And so that's how it got fixed. And that's what got me to PMI. Because when I got laid off from Lockheed after 29 years, it's like, well, whoa, what am I going to do now? And so I started looking around and I thought, okay, it looks like finally, after all these years of denial on PMP, I would have to do it. And so, well, you know, people that worked for me would come and say, will you pay for my PMP? I said, no, we have our own training. We have our own program management training here at Lockheed. It's very good. You don't need your PM. If you want to go get it, go ahead and get it. But, you know, we're not paying for it. Meanwhile, Sierra Nevada now, you know, and things have changed over the last 15 years. You have to have a PMP if you want to be a program manager and have a government contract, have responsibility for a government contract. So I did do it and it was good and I enjoy it and I need the PDUs. So that's why I'm doing this. I'm not selling anything. I'm not doing any training, you know, unless you guys have ideas. So around the time I got my PMP, I did land a job as a director of operations for a startup. So when I got here to Rockville, I'd hear about all these people that the IBM guys knew that went and jumped ship to AOL and made millions of dollars. They said, oh, you should, you know, they were lucky they did that, right? And so it kind of created a little mystique around startups and, you know, that continues, of course. So here was a chance to be part of a startup that had been going for 10 years. One of the things I didn't mention, because I'm running out of time, lean design is a part of lean that I applied in Syracuse and down in Florida, running lean design Kaizens. But what we had here, this unit that you're seeing here is a second generation facial recognition, 3D facial recognition system. It could pick somebody out of a group of 6 people running towards the sensor. There are a number of these systems in Saudi Arabia. They were our big funder. They funded us 2 chunks of 50 million. That's how I got hired. And we're always hoping there was going to be an IPO at some point, but the king died over there. We had all our eggs in one basket and it went down, 160 people down to me in a year. And I was one of the last people out the door, packing everything up. Eventually sold to Stereo Vision in California. And one of the things that we did that was great, I mean, we did good things. This is a risk burn down chart. I kind of forced the engineering guys to do this. What we did here is we took 100% and broke it up by all the key technical milestones, and we gave weights to those milestones, adding up to 100, and then charted it out. Our original plan was to get that risk burnt down basically in 7 months. Didn't quite turn out that way. You know, it took us a bit longer, but it was an effective tool. A lot of times when you're trying to, you know, pulse where you are in the design process, you might say, oh, well, I'm going to count drawings. You know, how do you know where you are? I think this is one of the best tools out there to really think about this and think about what the technical challenges are at each of these stages, and then gauge that, put them in time, and engage, plot it out, and engage where you are. And then that gets back to that other thing of, you know, doing the easy things first and keeping the tough tests until last. You know, this is a way to see through that right at the very beginning. So I'm going to skip that chart and go to the summary. Any questions? Oh, I thought I heard something.
I said good idea.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Good idea. Wrap it up. Hopefully it's not raining out there yet. Okay, good. Yeah, so some of the things I covered: know your GFE as soon as you can in a project. You know, and then dealing with a lot of young leaders, you know, might have that issue, you know, of just trying to status people and not, you know, really engage with them. So that's something you learn as part of the leadership process. Leveraging a key artifact, we talked about that. And knowing how your project impacts the larger business, we talked about that. And then organizational mojo, ways to kind of bring a team back up that's down. And having the right metrics. The higher you go, somehow you need to have the right metrics, and don't be afraid to take a deep dive when you need to. A lot can be learned, and you know, of course, it's good to have people at all levels that you trust that will tell you the truth. And I didn't really spend a lot of time talking about MVP, but minimum viable product. But that's kind of a whole discussion. But that part of that discussion was the risk burn down. And I think, you know, if there's a way you in your business can figure out how to use that risk burn down. We spent a lot of time on risk management. Carl Pritchard made a life of it, and he's very funny to see if you can see him. He makes risk management fun. But you know, when it comes to technical risk or you know any other kind of risk, if you can chart it out and gauge yourself, then that's a positive thing. So I will make one commercial, like Matt said. I am a musician. I do have some things on Spotify. If any of you use Spotify, my latest album is called "No Place for Kings." So if you search on Hoffmann, "No Place for Kings," you can listen. What's that? Yes, it is. Yes, it is timely. Yep. All right, Matt. Thank you.
Okay, the slides and the Spotify playlist will be made available in the next newsletter. No precipitation on the sky yet, but we want to make sure to get everybody out of here. He did bring up the industry perceptions of the PMP. Our January virtual lunch and learn was with a young man who was awarded the 2024 Future 50, a young airman in the Air Force who wrote an academic paper about why the Air Force and the Defense Acquisition University should value the PMP and the PMBOK frameworks more than they are. So that's on our YouTube channel, and this talk will be on our YouTube channel by tomorrow morning. So thank you for being a member. A lot of exciting things coming up, and safe travels this evening. Thank you.
I